Now, I say many times, if he wanted to, he could come walking in here and give us a physical vision of himself. He could walk in here. He's the Lord. He's the Lord of heaven and earth. He could walk in here if he wanted to. And you know what he would do if he came in? He would go and look each one of you in the eye, call your name, because he knows your name. He knows us by name. And he knows everything in your life. He knows everything in my life. He knows everything that we're facing and dealing with and frustrated with, and he would look us in the eye and he'd call us by name and say, cheer up, it's me, I'm with you, don't be afraid. But since he's not here, he had never taken me up on my offer yet, he had never come in the door, though he could, I will be his spokesman and I will speak for him and I will say, cheer up, don't be afraid, he's with you. And he said, here it is, right here in the Bible. You could underline that and write your name next to it, because it's just as much talking to you as it is talking to those disciples. Be of good cheer, it's me. That means I'm here. Don't be afraid. So Peter, and I love Peter. He's always kind of speaking. Peter always says what everybody else is maybe thinking but afraid to say. But Peter just speaks right up and says, Lord, if it be thou, or if it is you, bid me come unto you on the water. In other words, Peter said, if it's really you, tell me to come. Bid me come. And now he's kind of put Jesus on the spot, because what can he say? No, it's not me, don't come. It is him. Peter said, if it's you, bid me come. But you know what's really behind this message, this question of Peter, or this statement of Peter, what's really behind it is Peter is really saying, in essence, if this is really true, let it be true for me too. In other words, if this that I'm seeing in your life, if it's really true, I want to experience it as well. And I think that's a good thing to say. I think that's what we would like to do, to have also. If it's really real, I want to experience the reality for myself. And so Jesus, did you know he wants us to experience the reality that he experiences? Remember what he said? I want you to know that in me you have peace. Now in the world you'll have trouble. Now in this experience here, the disciples were experiencing that trouble. But Jesus came and gave them a vivid demonstration of the fact that he wasn't upset. He wasn't disturbed. He wasn't experiencing the trouble that they were. You might say they could see that in him he was at peace. And so Peter said, if it's really true, let me come. And so then Jesus says in verse 29, come. Now Peter is kind of on the spot. What's he going to do now? He can't. I think, what about these other 11 disciples, all just looking at him, But now Peter has an opportunity, doesn't he? He has an opportunity. He could stay in the boat and keep on experiencing everything everybody else is experiencing. But Jesus has invited him, and us as well, to come and walk the way he walks and live the way he lives and experience the reality that he experiences, because he says, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he took him up on it. I just wonder what that must have been like for Peter, to stand on the edge of that boat, look at that water. But you know what? The truth of it is, he wasn't looking at the water at this point. He wasn't looking at the waves. He was only looking at Jesus, and the only thing in his mind is, there's Jesus, and he said, come. And as long as that was the only thing in his mind, everything was fine. Peter came down out of the ship, and he walked on the water to go to Jesus. So for this moment, in this verse, it's not just Jesus, it's Peter too. Peter walked just like Jesus. Peter experienced everything Jesus experienced. And all he had to do was, he just looked at Jesus and listened to Jesus, and Jesus said, come. So he said, all right, here I come. But notice what happened, and this is so telling, verse 30. When he, Peter, saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. It says, when he saw the wind. Now, do you mean to tell me that if everything was calm enough that you could get out and walk on the water? No, it didn't have anything to do with the wind. But when Peter saw the wind, he saw the trouble. When he got his eyes off of Jesus and onto the problem and onto the pressure and onto the thing that was causing all the disturbance, when he took his eyes off of Jesus, he began to experience all the frustration and all the natural things. And it's very interesting that it says he began to sink. Now, I've gone swimming many times, and with my kids we go swim. I've never yet begun to sink when I get in the water. You get in and you sink. Right? But Peter, this is so interesting. As his faith began to wane away, it says he began to sink. Just like that. See, I'm giving a demonstration. Now, that's not very natural, is it? But you see, look at the next verse, verse 31. Immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and he said, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? In other words, why did you doubt? What that tells me is, when everything was going fine and he was walking on the water, it was because he believed. It was by his faith. It was because he for that moment, took his eyes off of the storm, he took his eyes off of the wind and the waves, and he looked only at Jesus. And Jesus said, "Come." And he says, "All right, Jesus, here I come." But when he began to forget about Jesus and think about the wind and the waves, then he began to sink. Now, what is that message to us? What does that tell us? Well, in our lives, we can, if we choose to, look away from all the things that cause us frustration and trouble and problems and look to Jesus instead. And if when we do that, then we experience the peace. He said, "In me you have peace." Now, it's not that we don't have things we have to deal with in life. We do. We have a lot of things to deal with. But just like these disciples were in this ship and in the storm, but Jesus invited them to experience peace in the midst of it. Right in the midst of all the things we've got to deal with, if we can just, and it's a challenge to us, focus our attention on Jesus, focus our minds on Him, and be reminded of what He said. Be of good cheer. I'm with you. Don't be afraid. Sometimes we just have to tell ourselves that. Jesus, I'm thankful that you're with me and I don't have anything to be afraid of. Jesus, I'm thankful that you're with me and that gives me peace. I'm glad you're with me. What do I have to worry about? I'm just sort of paraphrasing that. Sometimes it helps to just remind ourselves of that truth. And it is a truth. And the amazing thing about it is when you can center your mind on that truth, on that reality, then you begin to experience the very same peace that He has and that He's experiencing. I told you that was all. I got one more. Just one more. And I'm not getting ready to be long-winded. I just got one more for you. This is in Philippians chapter, let's conclude with this, chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. And I'm concluding with this. I'm saying all those things to make sure that I actually stop. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. But I want you to see the same truth here. In the King James translation, it says, "Be careful for nothing." Now, we don't usually use careful in that way of speaking. What he means there is don't be full of care about anything. When we think of careful, we mean cautious. But the way it's used here, it means don't be full of care. Be careful for nothing, but in contrast to that, instead of being full of care, in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. I like what the Amplified translation says here. Elliot, could you give me that? Or Anton? Yeah, Anton. Amplified says, listen, do not fret or have any anxiety about anything. Well, that's a little more plain, isn't it? Now, when he says that, it's a challenge to us because we tend to want to fret. We tend to fret and have anxiety, don't we? We tend to lay in bed and turn things over and over in our minds. And we've been going through first with Elliot, now with Anton, all this dealing with colleges and they're very slow about making their offers and things and you apply and you hope for all these different scholarships and they're very slow about replying and giving you their answers. And I know back a few weeks ago when we were dealing with this with Anton, when all the kids all go to bed and it's just April and I, don't tell her I'm tattling on her, but she'd say, I just wish I could just relax about it. And I would say to her, of course, she's having to deal with the paperwork. She's having to call them on the phone. I just go about my merry way. But she said, I just wish I could just, and I would say, don't worry about it. It's all going to be okay. Don't worry, don't worry. Of course, it's easy for me to say, not having to deal with the paperwork and everything. But see, the same thing's true in all of our lives. But the same reality here is what he says to us. Do not fret or have any anxiety about anything. Now, when he says it that way, that's pretty much universal, isn't it? What does that exclude? That doesn't exclude anything. Does that encompass everything? That encompasses everything. Do not fret or have any anxiety about anything, but in every circumstance. How many is that? Well, that means all of them. In every circumstance and in everything. See, he's being universal here. In every circumstance and in everything, by prayer and petition, definite requests with thanksgiving, continue to make your wants known to God. In other words, instead of being full of anxiety and fretting and cares, let the Lord know. Now, it's not that He doesn't know already, but what you're doing is you're giving it to Him instead of you carrying it. Instead of you just trying to deal with it in your mind, you're taking your attention. Listen, you're putting your mind on Him instead of on you. Instead of on the trouble, you're setting your attention on Him. Go back to the King James. I like the way the King James has verse 7. And here's what happens when we do that. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Does this sound like anything we've read today? Well, Jesus said, in the world you'll have trouble and tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. I want you to know that in me you have peace. We saw that illustrated with Peter. When he looked at Jesus, when he had his attention on Jesus, he experienced the same experience that Jesus did. And here Paul's told us the same thing. Don't be full of anxiety or care about anything, but put your mind on God. Put your attention on Him and let Him know what's going on. Not that He doesn't know, but then you're giving it to Him by your prayer. And He says, the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. It sounds like this peace of God is a pretty powerful thing because it says it will keep your hearts and minds. Well, let's all stand up today. Thank you for being patient today.
Jesus is my